Welcome to the Road to Accountable AI. I'm Kevin Werbach, Professor of Legal Studies and Business Ethics at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. For decades, I've studied emerging technologies from broadband to blockchain. Today, artificial intelligence promises to transform our world. But AI won't reach its potential without accountability, mechanisms to ensure it's deployed in responsible, safe, and trustworthy ways. On this podcast, I speak with the experts leading the charge for accountable AI.
It's easy to ignore the role of humans in AI systems. Yet humans are ultimately the source of many of the problems that call for AI governance, as well as a key to making AI systems more accurate and responsible. My guest today is Wendy Gonzalez, the CEO of Sama, which is one of the leading companies providing model fine-tuning and related services. We had a fascinating conversation about Sama's roots, the value of humans in improving AI systems, managing and training the necessary workforce, ethical issues around global sourcing for this work, and what it takes to create AI systems that are truly sensitive to cultural differences. Wendy, thank you for joining me on the Road to Accountable AI.
Very glad to be here, Kevin.
First, tell us a little bit about what Sama is and what role the company plays in the AI development process.
Sama is a data annotation and model evaluation company. So we basically take care of structuring, validating, or fine-tuning the data that goes into training and fine-tuning AI models, whether it's traditional ML models or Gen AI.
And where did it come from? How has it developed over the years?
We have a bit of an interesting origin story. So we actually started as a nonprofit back in 2008, really focused very specifically on a social mission of lifting people sustainably out of poverty by providing them jobs, full-time jobs in the digital economy. So we work in underserved communities. We're working to provide first-time entry-level jobs in tech and full-time jobs, which are scarce. So 6 out of 7 people in sub-Saharan Africa are in the informal economy. And our goal was to provide full-time jobs with benefits, medical, et cetera. And this was really based off of the belief that talent is distributed equally, but opportunity is not. And the right way to really solve for a sustainable lift out of poverty is through work, not aid. So the idea was, let's do digital upskilling, let's bring people into jobs for the first time to give them the experience to allow them to get a next job and stay in the formal economy. So how does that get us to the work that we do now? Well, because we have a purposeful hiring model of hiring people on the basis of impact. So if we just think about that for a second, especially knowing this is a Wharton podcast, most people hire on the basis of experience or college degrees, et cetera. And we were trying to flip the model on its head to say, we want to provide entry into these jobs. So we hire on the basis of impact. So household income level, you don't need to have a degree, because our idea was we could do the digital upskilling. And because of that nature of how we do the hiring, we were not expecting people to come in and begin to do software engineering or programming. So we started with human judgment. And that's really where this started, was let's do human judgment tasks, whether it's transcribing, business cards like back in the day before optical character recognition, things of that nature. And I joined almost 10 years ago now. And when I joined the company, one of the things I observed is that human judgment is also really necessary in artificial intelligence. You need to have humans validate and train the data. So we started to shift our human judgment work, which is trainable. Basically, you just need to have human judgment. We have a platform where you can receive the tasks. And that's ultimately how we started. It was really driven off of our social mission and wanted to create jobs through the digital economy.
How do you go from that human judgment work, which presumably doesn't require significant skills and expertise, to things that may require more training or someone is just not able to do, just being hired for it?
It's an excellent point and observation. Is what we've seen as well, is that the kind of AI work that we did a decade ago is very different than the work that is being done now. So one of the concepts we had in our social mission is really about the future of work. So those skills change. Our goal is to build digital skills that allow people to, stay employed and in the formal economy. So what happened is we ended up really needing to shift a significant amount of focus into training, right? So not only what is AI and how do you leverage our platform, we also leverage our platform to sort of isolate those things that are human and let the machines do kind of the heavy lifting, if you will. And we ended up building domain expertise. So we have people who've been doing autonomous vehicles and are deep experts in understanding how to do LiDAR and sensor fusion, all the way to building partnerships with local universities to support things like domain expertise in Gen AI.
And can you talk a little bit more about, what some of those tasks are that you do now, especially in terms of
So we primarily focus on both supervised fine tuning as well as initial model development. So we provide the either the initial training data sets. We've been focusing quite a bit on multimodal models. So the combination of video or images in context with text or passages. Um, you know, AI agent type work with HR, legal, finance as an example. So those are the types of work that we're doing now, and it could also include validating synthetic data. So the cost of developing these models is quite high, and they require vast volumes of data. So whether we are validating synthetic training data, we are helping build some of the training data, or we are fine tuning and doing things like prompt engineering.
there's all these challenges around accuracy and bias in AI systems. Does the work that your workers do address some of those issues?
Yeah, I'm a big believer, and I think a lot of others are, that AI models, right, to develop responsible AI is really on four different pillars, right? One is really the data provenance. So where did the data come from? Do you have the right data to create a, fit for purpose application, right? Because if it's too little, too much, there's a whole bunch of challenges that could result in bias in the model. So we really focus on that data provenance, that data governance. But the other couple of pillars are human-centric validation. Um, you can leverage models to build models, but you can imagine you wanted to go from A to B, you might end up somewhere over at C or D if there's not a model evaluation or checkpoints in place. So we provide that level of human validation. But also, we spend a significant amount of our time talking to our clients about what does good look like. I know it sounds like a simple question, but really understanding what is your use case, how are we expecting to perform, really feeds into the process of not only ensuring that you have the right data, but you're doing the right validation checkpoints, and you can actually confirm that even after that model is deployed and new data is being ingested, that you know what good looks like, right? You can validate and ensure that it stays performant.
So for someone who's not familiar with how the model development and fine-tuning process works, is that essentially a worker gets theories of outputs and is saying, this is right, this is wrong, and it's going into the reinforcement learning engine, or is there more to it than that?
That is one example use case to where you can get a set of data. So, for example, in prompt engineer or fine tuning, the model has responded to a prompt, and the human is saying, "Okay, this is accurate. It's not accurate. The sentiment is off. That's super awkward wording." As an example. And so that's what a human is doing, is just doing some of that fine tuning, saying, "Hey, the model didn't get it right." And then typically, the ML engineers who are kind of doing the turning the dials, the knobs, right? They're doing the weights and bias, the fine tuning. Will then say, okay, great, we need to train more in this aspect to get the model smarter for whatever it might be. It might be math or programming, et cetera. So that is oftentimes what we're doing. In some cases, we're actually validating synthetic data that's used to train the engine. We could be validating or creating the data. So in some cases, for specific applications, you need a specific type of data that's not easily accessible through your existing data set. And so that actually needs to be created to initiate the training. So it's kind of like a full life cycle. Typically, it starts very iteratively, and I just think of it as a big circle, right? So you start, you train the model, you figure out, can it do certain functions? You evaluate its scores, you then tweak it, and you continue to go through this process sort of over and over again until you get to a point of saying, yeah, this model's ready for prime time.
I would assume in some cases there are cultural or other kinds of issues that become relevant, and what is an accurate response for a model, especially if we're talking about things like toxicity or something like that, is going to depend on some contingent judgment. So if you've got people that are coming from all around the world, how do you ensure that you're matching up the decisions they're making with what the model developer wants?
Yeah, it's a really, really, I think, important point because what does the role of cultural context play? And given that these models, they know no boundaries. I mean, I think that's the thing that's kind of crazy about Gen AI is that it's not like you're saying, "Hey, I'm building a autonomous vehicle that will operate in London, versus around the globe." You're talking about literally any topic and any subject that these models, can be asked. So that cultural context can become important. Like, we can see the performance, for example, in India, with ChatGPT is going to look different than it does in the US in terms of performance. So one of the things that we do is we try to isolate and understand what is that level of cultural context. Now we found that with the strong English languages that we have in East Africa, that we've had good we've been able to balance some level of training with, kind of existing knowledge. But I mean, the reality is that, yeah, there'll be differences. I remember working on a very large e-commerce project. You had to identify, you had to identify pudding. Well, pudding may be one thing to us. What does blood pudding look like? Fruit curd pudding look like? And so,
And it just means dessert in the UK, right? As
right,
opposed to one particular thing here, right?
exactly, or a Jello pudding cup, right? And so those are some of the examples to where that cultural context can become helpful. And there are ways to train and sort of guardrail for it and do sampling and things of that nature. But there is an aspect of that which is also, I think, one of the reasons why it's very important that you get diversity, not just in the
Mhm.
data, that also the people that are actually touching the data.
And with regard to issues of bias, the challenge is often the humans. It's not that the AI system uh, generates these biased results. It's training on data and decisions that are made by humans. So if you are putting more humans in the loop in the process, for developing and improving these models, how do you combat the potential for those humans to add to the biases of the model?
Yeah, the potential inconsistencies. I think that that's absolutely a factor. But I would probably bring in. I would answer that in really a couple of ways. One is that the model valuation. So, how do you define quality? Is a really critical thing. Because if you don't know what you're looking for, nobody ever gets it right the first time, right? You may not. You may be starting. The old adage of garbage in, garbage out. You may be starting with the wrong starting point. Which, again, if you don't have all the right data, then you get inference bias, right? That just occurs naturally because you're missing something. Um, the other component of having an evaluation rubric is that you might have underfit or overfit your model, right? So if you underfit, it means the next time this new data comes in, it's like, whoa, I don't know how to deal with this. So it starts with understanding what are we really trying to tweak and work for. And then there are a lot of different methods in which you can drive consistency. And so consistency can be anything from we are leveraging, it sounds ironic, but automation basically to make sure that the human in the loop responses are consistent. It could be everything from automated quality checks, grammatical checks, things that you could to ensure consistency, um, all the way to other approaches, which can include consensus building. But as an example, that creates bias in a crowd situation because in the crowd, you only get paid when you get it right. So there are so many numerous examples and studies that say you just keep hitting that button, just keep hitting it until you get it right. And if that's how people are treating that, just to get to the point of getting paid, or, I'm really in, the Philippines, but I say I'm from the US, to get to, there's lots of gamesmanship that can happen in that place. So, um, even in that scenario, sometimes the volumes in the consensus can also have some flaws.
What do you do to combat this problem?
From our perspective, we do a couple of things. So one is we really focus very heavily on identifying the model evaluation standards and the quality rubrics. So working with our clients to understand, hey, what is it that we are really validating for and identifying quality and parameters associated with that and that accuracy. And then we leverage everything from systematic quality checks to actual quality and quality sampling and statistical sampling to ensure that we are seeing a level of consistency. And we've got a way to judge what good looks like. And in the cases of stuff that's subjective, I mean, it's not perfect, but it's going to get you to a place of understanding what are those ultimate sort of business rules that are necessary to create an accurate output, which could be factual accuracy, which could be grammatical accuracy, which could be tone, sentiment, etc. You name it.
And you've talked about the different stages all the way from the original data provenance through the process where these kind of mechanisms come into play. I mean, do you have a sense, is there an evolution in terms of where there is the greatest need for these quality improvements, or is it always across the board at every stage?
Well, I think that's the tricky part about AI is that it doesn't sort of sit on a shelf. It grows and changes as the world under our, the ground under our feet changes. And so it's an ongoing thing. You have to have some level of performance and feedback mechanisms. So for models that are put out in production, and we talk a lot about generative AI, but you could say the same thing for a self-driving car or, autonomous vehicles. It's the same thing where it may go on a new road and you have to have a feedback mechanism for a user, right? Or internally to be able to flag and say, hey, that's not accurate, right? Or I don't know if you drive a Tesla or have, any of the driven those vehicles before, if it suddenly slams on its brakes, you hit the report button, right? To capture the camera information to say, hey, you need to fix this. So that feedback mechanism is constant. A lot of estimates are that it even takes 15+% or more to just maintain the models that are put out there. So it's a long way to say that, yes, it does occur at each stage, but the sort of level of effort and the, cost associated with it reduces ultimately over time. And you're more in an evaluation and tuning stage.
But actually, that addressed the next question I was going to ask you, whether in time there's enough data and enough accuracy in the models that the need for the kind of human feedback you're doing decreases. It sounds like that still continues because there's always something.
I think it does still continue. Does the volume continue at the same pace it used to? No, I don't think so. I mean, we've even seen that in the world today where, if more can be automated, it will be automated. But it's very difficult to, and I would say, I think most experts would very, very much agree that you don't want to lose the notion of human-centric validation, that something is a model, that there's not enough transparency that says this is both how it's been built and how it's being checked. So kind of when we come back to responsible AI frameworks, right, we talked about data provenance, we talked about, transparency, we talked about model evaluation, et cetera. I think those things are really key because at the end of the day, there's going to be, there's some activity that's happening towards regulation and compliance, if you will. But at the end of the day, like really where we are able to balance innovation is going to be in standards, right? And open source and, getting everybody to come to the table and say, hey, this is the best practice way in which you develop models. Because at the end of the day, the adoption is about the user's trust, right? If you don't trust that system, and I think this is kind of this really interesting state we're at, Kevin, is that, I'm in California, and there was a bill that failed pretty spectacularly, SB 4057. I think I got the numbers right on that, but it had input from Anthropic, it had input from Meta, it had input from all these different companies. So it was the right kind of intention of public-private partnership, but also was pretty flawed. So lots of good intentions. Ultimately failed because some of those weren't, I think, very pragmatic, and there was a real concern of stifling innovation. Yet at the same time, every poll that you read on that said 8 out of 10 Californians think it's a good idea, right? We want to know how those systems are being built. We want to know that if you're building technology that's going to touch a financial system and say lending services, that it's not totally biased against a certain type of tool or could be subject to, cyber attack, right?
Beyond the specific work that you do at Sama, how do you think we get to a more trustworthy AI environment?
I think a lot of it is about education and standards. So I think it's got to be a combined path of some level, some position. I mean, I don't think you could solve innovation through government policies. I mean, not to ding, on on that, but I think there's a role for government to play, which is to encourage the right kind of behavior or discourage the wrong kind of behavior. So I think there is some framework. It's a really difficult problem to solve, but to I think there's value to identifying higher risk systems. I think there's value to saying if this technology can be used, it can be hacked or otherwise, right, and is embedded into critical areas of like national security. These are important things that we should be doing, absolutely, to have the right guardrails in place. But at the end of the day, the decisions that are being made on these AI models aren't decisions that are being made in Washington, D.C. or in, Sacramento in California. It's the engineer who's building it who has to have that understanding and framework. So I'm more of a fan of, or I should say, I think it's a two-pronged approach, which is this notion of responsible and transparent AI, getting those guidelines and best practices out there. Enterprises who are investing heavily in this should take a responsibility to educate, train, share, and then that same thing needs to go on the consumer side. I think a lot of people go and they start entering in like, I know enough to know that if I'm going to leverage any LLM, I'm not going to give or ask it information about myself because that is me then giving up my own personal data to train that model, right? So, I chose to opt out of the LinkedIn, auto AI algorithms to collect my data and send more personalized. So that education also exists on the consumer side, because the way I look at it is it's very simple. Like even hair dryers have warning labels. Don't plug it in next to water, right? So you need to have that kind of visibility. So it's multi-pronged.
Let me turn back to Sama and your business. How do you find quality people, and then how do you effectively train them?
So we have a couple of approaches. So we have our impact, our impact focus. So that is the hiring on the basis of impact. We go through kind of an AI 101, which is uh, everything from just post-digital literacy to what is AI, like what are the inputs that you're providing, how does it train the model, and being transparent about that, being transparent about how AI is used in our own platforms, teaching about use cases, and sort of quality and business rules associated with creating, predictable and accurate data. So we go through sort of a baseline training and then, of course, customer-specific training. And what we are certainly finding with Gen AI is that oftentimes because of the also somewhat subjective nature of the tasks, that you have to start with some level of domain experience. So it's going to be pretty difficult to validate a set of Python code or create training data for Python code if you don't have never programmed before. And so this is where we have been focused on our same communities where job creation is quite important. But we're partnering with the University of Nairobi and Swarthmore and Macquarie in Uganda as an example.
There's a longstanding debate about outsourcing in many industries, ranging from IT to apparel, and the question about whether it's actually benefiting people when their prevailing wage is going to be significantly less than in the developed world. So is there anything different about how that plays out within the realm that you're dealing with?
I think there's a couple of components. The first and most important one is this is a lot. There's a lot of wealth and opportunity that's being created from AI and from the digital economy. Why should not the global world participate, or should it be relegated to a small group of people in the Silicon Valley or in Austin or in other locations, right? Like this is a huge opportunity, and I think it's the world is flat, right? There's an opportunity for economic prosperity and growth across the board. So that's one thing. The second component is that things don't cost the same everywhere. There's a purchasing power component associated with this. So it's you look to any global company and you tell me, is the front desk reception person going to make the same thing in Bangalore, India, that they would in San Francisco, California, that they would in any of those other locations. So the way that we do this, and I'm certainly a big proponent of this, and this is part of both responsible and ethical AI, is transparency in wages. So it's very easy for this to be a race to the bottom. So certainly what we advocate for in the model that we take on at Sama is we leverage the Anchor methodology. So that's a globally recognized methodology for identifying living wages, which is, based off of these standards, to have safe housing, to have 10% savings, to afford education, medical care, healthy foods, things of that nature. In my location, what is that living wage, right? That is really the representation or tailored approach. And so we do that across every location that we work in. Say, this is what the living wage is. And it typically corresponds, it obviously rises with inflation. And as an example, in Kenya, the living wage is going to be about almost 4 times more than the minimum wage, the bare minimum wage, right? So there is a relative kind of view, if you can think about it like that. And that's what we look at is we say, hey, what is the living wage is our benchmark. We evaluate that every year through a series of surveys, leveraging this methodology. And yeah, that is both, it's fair. We know that we're providing to meet the standards. And, it's not easy. Living wage goes up more than, necessarily market wages do. But that's a commitment we've made. And I think the transparency of this notion of full-time employment and living wages is really important because otherwise it is a race to the bottom, right? The top, it's just going to continue to get cracked down further, further, and further. And I think the thing that we should be incentivizing, well, one for humanity, but second for also accuracy is, do you want to have the people that are training your models or working for this, be incentivized to do as much as they humanly can in the shortest amount of time possible? You want it to be quality. It's really difficult to do that if you haven't set, basically a safe and effective work environment, right? And that's the benefit of a formal job, right? You get sick, you still get paid. You have to go paternity leave or maternity leave, you still have those protections. And I think those actually ultimately equate to better work at the end of the day.
How else do you ensure that you're operating in ethical ways? You talked about the original intent to the company was as a nonprofit, but now you've raised venture capital, you scaled up a lot. What does it mean to realize that commitment to ethical sourcing?
So we do in a couple ways. The one primary way we do it is we hold true to our impact hiring practices. The goal is to be able to provide opportunities to people who've got the greatest barriers to employment. So we do that. We track that. We have our commitment to living wages. So we have an impact team that does that evaluation review every year. We report on that, in our UN SDGs. So we hold ourselves accountable to ensuring that we drive that forward. And then we work towards, there are 5 UN SDGs that we are targeted on specifically, but it includes, a fair and safe working environment, includes gender, diversity. So one of the things that was part of our core social mission was that we would hire at least 50% women or people identified as female. And that was a purposeful approach we took from a mission standpoint, because there's a lot of data that tells you that when women succeed, communities succeed. And so we've continued to keep that focus of diversity as well, from kind of the bottom up to the top.
You had mentioned there with OpenAI, where, as I understand it, workers were psychological consequences of viewing toxic content for the processes they were involved in. As I understand, you cancel that contract. I'd be interested to hear how you think about making those decisions in terms of what kinds of work to engage in and when to decide that you need to step away.
Yeah, I appreciate that. There were a couple of key things. So first off, from an OpenAI standpoint, that was a short pilot project to do training. It was one of 2 projects that we've done in harmful content, and ultimately the learning from that was that's not part of our core. We're not going to do this. So we had it represents 2 out of probably 3,000 engagements and projects we've run over the course of the decade. So it was a learning to focus on our core competencies. And we did a couple of things that were really, I think were very good sort of learnings. The first thing we did is we said, okay, how did we, how do we get here? We didn't have a clear enough view of what we will do and what we will not do. So we instituted a service line boundary. And that's basically something we instantiated up through both our board and into our contracts. One example is we will not do any projects that involve harmful content. We also took that a step further and said, okay, are there industries or areas that we think we should just clearly draw that boundary on? And we made a call to say we're not going to focus on weapons. We are not going to focus on big tobacco. We just said, hey, these are things that we're going to just draw a line and say, hey, let's stay clear. But the thing that is very interesting is that there is the world changes, right? What is harmful now could be different in 20 or 30 years. Think about urban safety. Could that data be taken to ultimately become, I don't know, invasive or surveillance? Like there's sort of all sorts of things. We said, hey, we don't know everything now, but let's create these boundaries, and then let's also create something that we call an ethics guild, which is representative of our associates in East Africa. So the people who are doing the annotation, management, people from our research team, marketer, et cetera, a cross-functional team that anybody in the company, if we have a new opportunity or client we're pursuing can raise and say, hey, this seems to fall into a gray area. Like it's clearly it's not harmful or it's not in this industry, but it seems like it's gray. And so that process has worked really well. We've had maybe a dozen or so cases raised since we launched the Ethics Guild. And I'm like, one example was, this is work that's right in our wheelhouse. It was like, I don't know, computer vision, self-driving cars or something, smart cities or something to that effect. But somebody said, wow, we've actually done some observation, and this company is actually based in a country that has a really, really bad history of violating human rights and some other things. So it got broad. We looked at that and then said, okay, maybe one of the aspects to this is that, countries, right, or other, areas that we say these, companies based in these countries, we would not go down that path, right? So that was an example of where something new came up. We didn't have we had a lot of things documented, but we had a mechanism to capture something new and draw a line in the sand. So yeah, it's been, there's definitely some learnings from that situation, but I think we have tried to channel that into, just continually improving and being really clear.
And last thing, it is a big world, and AI is a technology that has implications everywhere, but the vast majority of the major AI development labs are in a small number of countries. What can be done to better globalize these systems so that they are most useful to people in other places like the developed world?
That is such a good question. It's one that I do deeply believe that you need greater diversity, right? I mean, AI knows no boundaries, right? It's not like we built something here, it's not relevant there. I think one of the ways we can do this is we can create ecosystems. So I was just in a conversation with some folks from the G7 who were really talking about, hey, how do we find this balance of government support? Some people are like, well, I think it's about, compliance and regulation, and we're going to tell folks how to do this. And then somebody raised their hand and they said, isn't that kind of like the opposite? Like, what if you're in a developing nation, like say some sub-Saharan nations in sub-Saharan Africa? Wouldn't we actually want to instead focus on creating an ecosystem? And I was like, yeah, that's at the end of the day, what's really key is that the way that we get greater diversity and greater representation is we get where the governments can engage is build STEM programs, build, like focus on providing, labs and GPUs and build those ecosystems so that ultimately there's greater diversity in both the talent and the technology that's being developed. So I think that's really the right broader way to do it. And then in the meantime, I think that there is a great opportunity for, the companies, if they're thinking about this in that kind of, broader responsible AI framework, to say, hey, who can I involve both in terms of the data and through the supply chain to create something that's more representative? So that's probably how I'd answer that.
Great. Wendy, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Kevin.
This has been The Road to Accountable AI. If you like what you're hearing, please give us a good review and check out my Substack for more insights on AI accountability. Thank you for listening. This is Kevin Werbach. If you want to go deeper on AI governance, trust, and responsibility with me and other distinguished faculty of the world's top business school. Sign up for the next cohort of Wharton's Strategies for Accountable AI online executive education program, featuring live interaction with faculty, expert interviews, and custom-designed asynchronous content. Join fellow business leaders to learn valuable skills you can put to work in your organization. Visit execed.wharton.upenn.edu/ACAI for full details. I hope to see you there.